Economic crisis and social unrest in China in 2025. Signs of systemic collapse and the awakening of the people. Shenzhen, the shattered symbol of the Chinese dream. For decades, Shenzhen, Guangdong, has been heralded as the epitome of China's economic miracle. Transforming from a small fishing village into a global metropolis, Shenzhen boasted a GDP consistently among the nation's highest, skyscrapers sprouting like mushrooms, and cutting-edge infrastructure, CBC. However, in the spring of 2025, this glossy image was torn apart by a series of unexpected events, exposing deep cracks in NCVBNA's economic and social fabric. The massive strike in Shenzhen's Bingshan district in April 2025 was a pivotal moment. Hundreds of migrant workers, their faces etched with exhaustion and hands calloused from labor, gathered at the gates of a major construction site, holding banners that read, "Return our hard-earned money," and 3 months without wages. They were protesting a subcontractor under China's Second Construction Bureau, accused of withholding wages for over 10,000 workers, with unpaid amounts exceeding 8 billion yuan, approximately $1,100 million, 0 cents. According to the workers, many had not been paid since before the Lunar New Year, plunging them into dire straits, forcing them to take out usurious loans or lease farmland back home at bargain prices. One worker shared, "We work over 10 hours a day, from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., standing on scaffolding dozens of meters high, sweating profusely. Yet, for 3 months, we haven't received a single cent." The spark for this unrest was a shocking scandal. The Southern Regional General Manager of the Second Construction Bureau, a man surnamed Li, abruptly took leave in late March and was later rumored to have fled abroad with embezzled funds amounting to billions of yuan. This incident not only fueled the workers' outrage, but also laid bare a troubling reality. Corruption is not merely the fault of a few individuals, but a systemic feature of China's economic management. Instead of addressing the issue transparently, Shenzhen authorities swiftly deployed riot police the day after the strike to arrest those labeled as ringleaders of the disturbance, escalating tensions into street confrontations. Shenzhen is not an isolated case. In the first months of 2025, similar protests erupted in major cities such as Quanzhou, Fujian, Zhengzhou, Henan, Heilongjiang, Heilongjiang. These protests stemmed not only from unpaid wages, but also from issues like job cuts, inadequate compensation for land expropriation, and the broader economic downturn. According to the China Dissent Monitor, of the over 7,000 incidents of social unrest recorded since 2022, 75% were driven by economic grievances, such as wage arrears, housing disputes, and forced land seizures. These events are not mere localized conflicts, but symptoms of a systemic crisis rooted in economic stagnation, rising public debt, and a collapse in social trust. This article provides an in-depth analysis of the economic crisis and social unrest in China in 2025, focusing on the root causes, specific manifestations, and long-term consequences. We will examine the latest economic data, the government's policy responses, and the shifting social psyche, particularly among the youth. Finally, the article will assess China's prospects at this historical crossroads. Will the nation remain mired in silence and repression, or will it witness a wave of awakening and change driven by its people? Economic context: the collapse of the growth model. China's economic reality in 2025. China was once celebrated as the engine of global growth, achieving an average GDP growth rate of nearly 10% annually from the late 1970s to the early 2010s. However, since the early 2010s, China's economy has slowed, and 2025 marks a critical turning point as structural issues become impossible to conceal. According to the Merrick's China Forecast 2025, 65% of the 843 experts and observers surveyed predict China's GDP growth in 2025 will fall below 5%, lower than the official 5% target set for 2024, and the reported 5.2% growth in 2023. Some independent analysts, such as Rhodium Group, offer even bleaker estimates, projecting real growth of only 4.5% in 2025, depending on the effectiveness of economic stimulus measures. Key economic challenges facing China include weak consumer demand. According to Merix, 73% of experts rate weak consumer demand as a significant or highly significant risk to the economy. After lifting the zero-COVID policy in late 2022, many expected a robust recovery in domestic consumption, but instead, household spending has sharply declined. Chinese citizens, particularly the middle class, are tightening their belts due to concerns about job security, declining asset values, especially in real estate, and the lack of reliable social safety nets. Real estate crisis. The real estate sector, once accounting for about 25% of China's GDP, has been in crisis since 2020, when the government tightened borrowing regulations for developers. The default of Evergrande in 2021 triggered a domino effect, leading to the collapse of numerous real estate firms and paralyzed in local governments that relied on land sale revenues. According to Liberty Street Economics, new real estate sales have plummeted by 60%, and active construction area has dropped by 20% since its peak. Falling housing prices have eroded household wealth and undermined consumer confidence. Public and local government debt. China's public debt, encompassing central and local governments and state-owned enterprises, exceeded 365% of GDP in the first quarter of 2024, per the Institute of International Finance. Local governments, heavily dependent on land sales for revenue, face a financial crisis as the real estate market collapses. The central government announced a 10 trillion yuan, approximately $1.4 billion, 0-cent stimulus package to restructure local government debt from 2024 to 2028, but many experts argue this is insufficient to address the scale of the problem. Unemployment and inequality. The urban youth unemployment rate, ages 16 through 24, excluding students, reached 16.5% in March 2025, according to the National Bureau of Statistics of China. This reflects the plight of millions of college graduates unable to find suitable jobs. In 2025, over 12.2 million college graduates will enter the labor market, an increase of 430,000 from the previous year, intensifying pressure on an already strained job market. Meanwhile, income disparities between urban and rural areas continue to widen, with the urban-to-rural income ratio reaching 3.331 in 2009 and growing further in recent years. External pressures. The trade war with the United States, particularly under the re-elected Trump administration, has exacerbated Chinese economic woes. The U.S. imposed a 20% tariff hike on Chinese imports in early 2025, prompting Beijing to retaliate with tariffs on American agricultural products and sanctions on U.S. companies. According to Bloomberg, protests driven by financial issues surged in the month leading up to Trump's inauguration, and the ongoing trade war threatens millions of jobs in China's export sector. The failure of the investment and export-driven growth model. China's economic growth model over the past 4 decades relied on 3 pillars: large-scale infrastructure investment, export-oriented manufacturing, and real estate. However, this model has reached its limits. Overinvestment and excess capacity. China has heavily invested in priority industries such as industrial robotics, solar energy, and semiconductor manufacturing through strategies like Made in China 2025. However, this has led to severe overcapacity. For example, according to Foreign Affairs, China's solar industry produced double the global demand in 2023, forcing manufacturers to dump products on international markets, triggering anti-dumping measures from the US and EU. Similarly, while the robotics industry has grown, it focuses on low-end technologies, lacking competitiveness in high-end segments. Export dependence. Exports were a key driver of Chinese economic growth, with a record trade surplus exceeding $900 billion, 0 cents, in 2024, per Merix. However, this reliance makes China vulnerable to geopolitical disruptions, particularly protectionist measures from the US and Europe. The escalating trade war in 2025, coupled with the trend of economic decoupling between China and the West, has reduced demand for Chinese goods. Real estate and debt crisis. The real estate sector was not only an economic driver, but also a primary revenue source for local governments. As the real estate market collapsed, local governments lost land sale revenues, plunging them into debt. According to Brookings, many local governments are unable to fund welfare programs or infrastructure projects, leading to cuts in public services and rising public discontent. Economic stimulus measures, limited impact. Since late 2024, the Chinese government has rolled out a series of stimulus measures to counter the economic downturn. These include interest rate cuts and monetary easing. The People's Bank of China, PBOC, shifted its monetary policy stance from prudent to moderately loose in December 2024, the first such change since the global financial crisis. Interest rates were significantly reduced, and new liquidity mechanisms were established to support the stock market. Fiscal stimulus package. The government announced plans to issue 3 trillion yuan, $411 billion, 0 cents, in special bonds in 2025, primarily to fund infrastructure and enhance national security. Additionally, a 10 trillion yuan debt restructuring package for local governments was launched from 2024 to 2028. Consumer support. Some programs to boost consumption, such as issuing shopping vouchers and subsidies for car purchases, were introduced. However, these programs are considered too small to have a significant impact. While these measures helped GDP growth reach 5.4% in the first quarter of 2025, surpassing expectations, many analysts argue the impact is short-lived. According to Oxford Economics, Chinese policymakers are awaiting further clarity on the impact of U.S. tariffs before committing to larger stimulus packages. Meanwhile, structural issues like high debt, excess capacity, and lack of consumer confidence remain unaddressed. Social unrest, consequences of the economic crisis, protests, and resistance. The economic downturn has fueled a surge in social unrest across China. According to Bloomberg, protests driven by financial issues spiked in early 2025, with key causes including wage arrears, housing disputes, and forced land expropriation. Notable examples include Shenzhen, Guangdong. As mentioned, the Pingshan district strike was one of the largest, involving over 10,000 workers. This event not only highlighted wage arrears, but also exposed corruption in infrastructure projects. Zhou, Fujian. Hundreds of workers surrounded a government building after a factory bankruptcy left them unpaid. The protest was violently dispersed by special police forces. Harbin, Heilongjiang. Residents displaced by slum redevelopment projects took to the streets, only to be beaten and arrested by police. Random violent attacks. A disturbing trend is the rise in random acts of violence, such as stabbings and vehicles plowing into crowds. According to Oxford Analytica, these revenge attacks on society often stem from individuals facing financial hardship or resentment toward authorities, reflecting declining mental health and social trust. Widespread discontent. The economic crisis has not only sparked protests, but also profoundly altered the social psyche. According to Asia Society, Chinese citizens are increasingly pessimistic about the future, feeling that the current system is unfair, particularly in wealth and resource distribution. Surveys indicate complaints about the inability to advance due to inequality and corruption within the system. Middle class. The middle class, once a key driver of consumption, is losing confidence as asset values, primarily real estate, plummet. Many feel trapped by large mortgage loans while incomes stagnate. Youth. Chinese youth, particularly those born after 1995, face high unemployment and limited career opportunities. According to the Epoch Times, this frustration could lead to social unrest, especially in second- and third-tier cities, where college graduates return without job prospects. Migrant workers. Migrant workers, a significant portion of the urban workforce, are hardest hit by wage arrears and harsh working conditions. The HUCO, Household Registration System, continues to restrict their access to housing and education in cities, deepening their sense of abandonment. Government repression. In response to rising social unrest, the Chinese government has adopted harsh repressive measures. According to Human Rights Watch, the government has tightened information control, banning discussions of economic policies and punishing critics. A leading economist from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences disappeared in September 2024 after criticizing President Xi Jinping's economic policies in a private WeChat group. Similarly, Chinese-American artist Gao Zhen was detained in Beijing for allegedly defaming Chinese heroes and martyrs. Protests are often swiftly crushed by riot police, with participants threatened or arrested on charges of disrupting public order. The government has also intensified online surveillance, deleting posts or videos related to protests on platforms like Weibo and Douyin. However, videos demanding wages and live streams advocating for rights continue to spread, indicating that public discontent has outpaced the government's ability to control. Root causes: a system of domestication and authoritarian rule. Society's silence, the result of domestication. A pressing question is why, amidst growing economic hardship and social injustice, most Chinese citizens choose silence over resistance. The answer lies in the nature of China's authoritarian regime, a system that not only controls through force, but also employs a sophisticated process of domestication that begins at birth and persists throughout life. Education and propaganda. From primary school, Chinese citizens are taught that national strength equates to personal happiness, that the glory of the motherland is their pride, and that all difficulties are temporary. Slogans like, "The party is the mother," or "Stability above all," are repeated endlessly, fostering a mindset of submission and sacrifice of individual interests for the collective good. Education and media emphasize that any doubt about the system is dangerous thinking. Thought control. The government employs an extensive surveillance system, from internet censorship to a network of social informants to suppress dissent. According to Merrick's, the government has tightened information control amid the economic downturn, making topics like economic policy or corruption off limits in public discourse. Consequences of resistance. Chinese citizens are well aware that resistance comes at a steep cost. Protesters risk arrest, blacklisting by companies, or prosecution for picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Critics on social media may be summoned for tea or lose their jobs. Over time, silence becomes a rational choice for self-preservation. The result is a domesticated society where people are not immune to suffering or injustice, but have been stripped of independent thinking and belief in their ability to affect change. They are taught that problems stem from a few individuals, not the system, preventing them from seeing the bigger picture. Corruption and inequality, systemic diseases. Corruption is a primary driver of social discontent. The case of the second construction bureau manager fleeing Shenzhen with billions of yuan is just one of countless examples. According to Transparency International, China's Corruption Perceptions Index, CPI, ranked 76/180 in 2024, indicating persistent high levels of corruption despite President Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaigns. Corruption is not limited to high-ranking officials, but permeates state-owned enterprises and local governments. Large-scale infrastructure projects, once celebrated as symbols of China's speed, are often exploited for embezzlement. Meanwhile, ordinary workers, especially migrants, bear the brunt of unpaid wages or reduced pay. Simultaneously, economic inequality is worsening. According to Wikipedia, the urban-rural income gap widened from 2.56.1 in 1978 to 3.33.1 in 2009, and this disparity has continued to grow. The hukou system reinforces this inequality by limiting rural residents' access to urban housing, education, and healthcare. Xi Jinping's policies, prioritizing control over development. Under President Xi Jinping's leadership, China has shifted toward a model prioritizing stability, security, and self-reliance over rapid growth. According to Brookings, Xi appears to accept a period of economic stagnation to focus on long-term goals like technological self-sufficiency and reducing dependence on Western markets. Policies like Made in China 2025 and Common Prosperity aim to consolidate the Chinese Communist Party's CCP power and reduce inequality, but have created more problems than solutions. Technological self-reliance. China has heavily invested in industries like artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and quantum technology to reduce reliance on Western technology. However, export restrictions from the US and Europe have limited access to advanced technology, hindering these goals. Common prosperity. While promoted as a policy to reduce inequality, Common Prosperity has placed immense pressure on local officials, forcing them to invest in inefficient industrial projects to meet GDP targets, leading to waste and rising debt. Social control. The government has intensified surveillance and repression to maintain stability. According to Merrick's, 63% of observers predict that maintaining public order will be the CCP's top priority in 2025, overshadowing economic issues like real estate or consumption. Prospects and solutions. China at a historical crossroads. Short-term outlook. Ongoing crisis. In the short term, China is likely to continue facing severe economic and social challenges. The following factors will shape the country's outlook in 2025 and beyond. U.S.-China trade war. The Trump administration's protectionist policies, including high tariffs and technology restrictions, will continue to pressure China's export sector and supply chains. According to Merrick's, if U.S. tariffs are imposed at the expected levels, Beijing may be forced to roll out larger stimulus packages to mitigate the impact. Real estate crisis. Despite government measures to stabilize the real estate market, such as lowering mortgage rates and expanding social housing, analysts predict the market adjustment will take years, continuing to affect household wealth and local finances. Rising social unrest. With high unemployment, widespread wage arrears, and growing inequality, protest and social unrest are likely to persist. However, the government will continue using repressive measures to maintain control, escalating tensions with the public. Declining trust. Loss of confidence in the government and institutions is spreading, particularly among the youth and middle class. According to Asia Society, this disillusionment may lead to behaviors like emigration, capital flight, or seeking alternative spiritual values, such as religion. Long-term outlook, reform or collapse. In the long term, China faces a historical crossroads, with two primary paths. The path of reform. A plausible, though unlikely, scenario is that the Chinese government undertakes deep structural reforms to address economic and social issues. According to IMF working papers, reforms like boosting consumption, reducing the dominance of state-owned enterprises, and improving social safety nets could sustain China's potential growth at 4.3% from 2025 to 2040. However, such reforms require a significant shift in the CCP's mindset, which prioritizes control over liberalization. The path of collapse. Without reform, China risks falling into a cycle of economic stagnation and social unrest. According to Dissent magazine, China's current growth model, reliant on investment and suppressing consumption, is unsustainable. A public debt crisis, combined with widespread discontent, could lead to the collapse of the current political system, similar to other authoritarian regimes in history. The way forward. The people's awakening. Despite the Chinese government's success in maintaining societal silence for decades, signs of an awakening are emerging, particularly among the youth. Unlike their parents' generation, Young Chinese today have access to the internet and information about the outside world. They see how people in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Ukraine fight for freedom and dignity, and they are beginning to realize that submission does not bring happiness. The protests in Shenzhen and other cities are evidence of this shift. Videos demanding wages, live streams advocating for rights, and short films exposing injustice are spreading on social media despite government censorship. According to China Dissent Monitor, the number of social unrest incidents rose from 8,709 in 1993 to over 90,000 annually between 2007 and 2009. And this figure has continued to climb in recent years. This awakening is not limited to protests. Many young people are seeking to leave China, transfer money abroad, or participate in underground cultural movements to express dissent. Some are turning to religion and spirituality to find meaning in an increasingly unstable society. However, transforming this awakening into a genuine movement for change requires overcoming fear and organizing collectively. According to Merrick's, one possible scenario is that rising social unrest forces the government to make concessions, leading to partial reforms. However, this will demand unity and courage from the people, especially in the face of continued repression. The year 2025 marks a critical juncture in China's history. The economic crisis characterized by the collapse of the real estate market, rising public debt, and weak consumer demand has exposed the weaknesses of the investment and export-driven growth model. Simultaneously, social unrest from workers' strikes to random acts of violence reflects growing public frustration with the current system. China's authoritarian regime, with its sophisticated domestication system and harsh repression, has kept society silent for decades. However, signs of awakening are emerging, particularly among the youth, who refuse to accept submission in exchange for dignity. The protests, though suppressed, are the first sparks of a movement that could reshape China's future. China now faces two paths: reform to build a more sustainable economy and equitable society, or continued repression and the risk of collapse. History shows that no regime can endure indefinitely by silencing its people. True freedom and happiness can only be achieved when the Chinese people rise and reclaim their rights.